Hey, hi
Hey,
there, Constant Gardener.
how you doing, David?
I'm doing
Great
really
to meet
well. Been looking forward to talking with you. Welcome to the secret sesh. And
you very much.
yeah, I got a little bit of heady glass to sesh with you, and I
Yeah,
got a little sweet outdoor organic ganja that was gifted to me by one of our very own Patreon supporters up in
very nice.
Humboldt, high-minded Humboldt. And
Right.
what do you got to puff on?
I have some recently harvested Pluto's Bride. It's a Gnome Automatics. This is all I've got left. So I'm gonna put some of that in my relatively new YLL Angus vape. I don't know if you've heard of these.
No,
Uh,
nor have I heard of that strain. So I'm
okay.
more interested in the strain. Tell me about that. Or should we I'm gonna get the
Well,
sesh
yeah,
going.
I'm gonna grind up a little bit, and I'll tell you what little I know. So I guess the background here is I've been growing since the spring of 2020 and come a long way since I started. I started with autoflowers after having done some research and concluding erroneously, as it turns out, that autos were the way to start to keep everything simple. I had no idea how finicky they are and relatively unforgiving. So anyway, um, I'm mostly a photo grower, but I grow autos on my kitchen windowsill under a proper light. There's just a sort of a perfect little spot I fit them in. So I don't get the kind of quantity that people who are really dedicated get from autos. I get what I get. It's my kitchen environment. The humidity fluctuates up and down. Temperatures are fairly stable, but it's not an ideal, totally controlled environment. So anyway, I've noticed that gnomes genetics, the stuff that I've grown thus far has been, and there are other auto breeders available, of course. Um, but yeah, I've noticed that gnomes stuff tends to be really robust and yields pretty well under the sort of suboptimal circumstances that I grow in. And yeah, so Pluto's Bride is another hybrid like everything these days. And I honestly can't tell you exactly what's in it. But one of the things I've noticed since I started growing and having actual control over what I'm consuming, how it's produced, what I'm selecting to grow, you know, in spite of my best efforts, a lot of stuff is kind of samey, you know? And I think it's got a lot to do with the sort of polyhybridism that you see in most genetics now. And maybe we can get into growth philosophies at some point here. But
Yeah, well, let me just jump in with a couple of terms defined for viewers who might, not be growers or might not be up on all the nomenclature. So, autoflowers are plants that have been in essence, they're going to start flowering a lot earlier, and that's hardwired into their genetics through breeding. And I think there may be something done to the seeds. Like I'm not an expert on it, but I'd say I've heard a lot of people say the same thing that they've had trouble with them. So
yeah,
your mileage may vary, and polyhybrids is just really so. We've had episodes of the show talking about landrace strains. You can
yeah,
listen to the episode about the Indian landrace exchange. These are the uh, original plants as you would have found them hundreds or thousands of years ago in their original zone that they evolved to be in. And hybrids is any crossing of two different genetically distinct strains or varietals or whatever you want to call them. That makes a hybrid. When you start to cross two hybrids, that's when you get, as you said, a polyhybrid. And as you can imagine, things get less and less distinct as you cross polyhybrid to polyhybrid. And, we see this in the world of food. At one time, there were hundreds of different commercial apples available
Yeah,
in the United States, and now if you go to the supermarket, you'll see the same 5 or 6. And of course, we don't
yeah,
want that to happen to cannabis.
yeah, exactly right. And that's a the apples analogy is really apt. I use it myself sometimes when I'm chatting with people about this. And to be honest, I mean, I would never want to represent myself as any kind of expert. I've, in fact, that people sometimes talk about how as they get older and further into adulthood, they realize they know less and less, right?
If you're smart, I think you realize that.
Oh,
Unfortunately, the
yeah.
opposite holds true.
Oh my God. Yeah. Don't get me started on anything political. Seriously. But yeah. So, as I was saying, as a grower, I feel like the deeper I get into it, the more I realize I don't know. But what I've done, and why we're referring to me as the constant gardener UK, is part of what I did when I started was I went on Instagram with this you know alternate persona, and I my intention was just to meet and connect with other people here in the UK that I could learn from, and just sort of feel a bit of community. Because although it's, if I step out of my flat here in central London and walk half a block away, I know I will smell weed. It's everywhere. And, but, there's a, there's a level of tolerance from the authorities, and I mean, I have some sense of their level of tolerance for growers, not through direct experience, thankfully, but through education from people who've been at it longer and have tangled officially with the law and everything else. And yeah, it's an interesting situation, because like again, when I started out in 2020, I was already aware that there's a whole microeconomy here in the UK supporting growers, both personal and black market commercial. So just one, I mean, the people that I started buying some of my first equipment from have 8 bricks and mortar stores sort of ringing Greater London that are still going, and
Yeah, absolutely. I just say when I first started working at High Times, and this is going back 20 years, and
yeah.
say it with me, back when they were cool. But
I,
you know,
by the way, can I just interject? Every time High Times comes up and every time you add the obligatory when they were cool, I think, all right, I don't know the backstory here and I would love to hear it. If not now, then at some point I would love to understand, to the extent that you're able to talk about it without getting yourself in the shit legally. Uh,
let me say, very fair question. Of course, I like to be cheeky about it, and the reason is, and this is what the sessions are for. This is like just speaking to the people who um, care about what we're doing here a lot. Not you know what I'm saying. I'm happy for everybody that listens. I'm willing to be a little more upfront and myself, and it comes down to I don't want to be like the bitter guy, you know? Like
sure,
I don't
sure.
want to be like talking shit at length about this place. Um but I also don't want to disown what was a really amazing period of my own life. So I still want to be able to tell my own stories
Yeah,
about that period of time and not hopefully be, the dwell in the past guy, but I think it's illustrative of how things have gone in general. So I just make that point, but to be more upfront, in essence, the people who took over the magazine are bad people.
okay,
No one can sue me for saying that. And I would say there's a really great Politico article
okay,
that covers this in some depth, and I think I'm yet to have. If and when I have my say about it, I'll have it, in my way and in a comprehensive way, and I'm definitely quoted in that article.
okay.
So thanks. Yeah, I do appreciate that.
No, I look, I totally get it, and I would never, I don't want to divert. the other things we could be chatting about too much. It was just a point of curiosity because I have listened to every single episode of the podcast and loved it. And again, props, big props to you for all the work you put into this. I just heard the latest with the guy whose name I'm not going to remember, Adam something.
Adam Eidinger, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, amazing. I listened to that while I was pruning my outdoor plants. Uh, I try
That
to listen.
is. Oh, sorry.
I try to listen when I'm working on my stuff, either the indoor or the outdoor. It puts me in the right mood. But yeah,
Uh,
I mean, just love the show, and it really deserves so much more support than you're evidently getting. I cannot believe you don't have 420 Patreon supporters, or you didn't this past April.
uh, yeah, we're still not quite there. First of all, just thank you for listening and getting high on history with me and secret seshing with me,
What a
and
pleasure.
and for the support and for the kind words. And um I say that one of the things that makes me happiest is when people let me know when they listen, and often, it is working with the plant, people working at dispensaries, people driving licensed or unlicensed cannabis around, and anywhere, super appreciate being a part of people's weed lives.
And I've
um
learned so much from it. It's more than just a good listen. And I'm a podcast addict because in order to keep myself semi-sane, I have abandoned all kind of news programming altogether. You know, so I don't listen to the radio anymore. I have to listen. I have to choose something deliberately to listen to, and it depends on what I'm doing. I mean, I like to listen when I can give it enough attention to learn whatever there is to be learned from each episode, and there is always a ton. So I feel like I need to go back to some of them to be reminded of certain things. But yeah, no, it's been really one of the best like cannabis focused podcasts I've found. In fact, it is the best in terms of like learning about the history. The other one that I like to learn about more sort of grow related topics is Shaping Fire, you know.
oh yeah, right on.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, great moments in weed history. What a gem.
Well,
Great.
thank you. And then now that I'm blushing and puffing, let's get back to
Yeah.
your weed journey and your weed life.
Yeah, ask me a simple, direct question because I can go off on a million tangents, especially the more I the more I dig into the vape. So
Well, that was that's what the secret sesh could have been called, a million tangents. But tell me a bit about what you can, and minding our p's and q's, which is
yeah,
a Britishism, I believe, pints and quarts.
yeah.
Uh, what you can about, it's heartening to hear that you've got about a block and a half radius before you smell weed in London.
Being
And
generous, man. I
is
mean, it can
that
be it
oh
could be a lot closer, but yeah,
it could be you first
yeah,
of all. So,
could be me.
is that how it was 5-10 years ago? And what do you see as, how would you describe the moment right now?
Um, yeah, good question. I mean, for sure, I've smelled it on the street all over town as long as I've lived in London itself, which is, I think, like 12 years now. Um, and yeah, I mean, weed's always been around here. It's funny. I went through a long period where I didn't really have it or have easy access to it, and I was a big drinker for most of my life up until 4 years ago, and I, alcohol is fucking poison as far as I'm concerned, and I finally managed to get rid of it from my life. And that's actually how I kind of got back into cannabis more proactively. I had a couple different people, another American guy that I used to get it from on the regs a few years back, and then he disappeared. He was a bit of a flake, as most dealers are, and he disappeared. And you know, um, the neighborhood I moved into about 6 years ago, it's close to everything, fairly high, densely packed area with people of all stripes, and I feel like it's definitely it's well, let's say since I moved into this area 6 years ago, there's a little park, block 2 blocks away from me to the south, that has kind of a permanent presence of people consuming and selling dime bags stuff. And you know, I walk through there almost every day with my dog. I never see the police, right? I mean, I've seen them once or twice, you know, um, and I feel like in general, what has changed is that people are smoking increasingly openly. So I'll smell it from, 20 meters away and walk directly past the guy who's openly smoking a big fat joint on the sidewalk in, a heavily populated, transited area, lots going on. Nobody gives a shit, you know, it's which is great. What's not great is that, you know, people like me who are mostly growing and consuming for medicinal reasons, you know, which isn't to say recreation isn't a facet of that, but fundamentally for some kind of self-care, like we don't feel any security about our little private home grows, which are clearly not commercial operations or at any kind of scale, you know, like there's no security. I mean, let me put it this way. One of the great things that happened along my kind of trajectory as a grower is that after the first year of growing mainly autos with, limited success, but I got something off them, whatever. And then kind of transitioning to photos, I was like, fuck this chemical nutrient bullshit. I can't be dealing with it. It's a constant guessing game. It's expensive. It generates a huge amount of plastic waste, you know, and there's so much bloody hype, which is one of the many downsides of trying to use social media to try and figure out what you're doing or find a community, is that everybody is trying to fucking hawk something to you, you know? Everybody's got the best miracle products, everybody's like, oh yeah, just throw some fucking CalMag on it or whatever. And it's overwhelming. And, but fundamentally, I just thought this cannot be the best way to grow. And, kind of over the time that I'd been spending growing and trying to study kind of proactively, I started reading about, organic living soil. And to cut to the chase, I found a local supplier, sent this guy a question on via his website. He came straight back to me and he said, give me a call, tomorrow between these times, and I'll tell you everything that you need to know. And he wasn't kidding. I could not get this guy off the phone, you know. And
The people who are passionate about soil are passionate about soil.
well, I mean, yeah. And I was sold. This guy and his partner make the soil in fairly small quantities. They spend a shitload of money importing all kinds of organic, additives to build the amendments that they use to fortify the soil before it goes out the door. And basically, once you've got this whatever volume of soil you need, all you really need to do is recharge that soil with dry amendments after each run, and you can use a bloom amendment during flower if you choose to. It's not really even necessary. And that's it. I don't even have to pH balance my water. And the water here in the southeast of England is hard as fuck, you know? So it's 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 amazing how much time, like practical busy time, but also psychic time and energy is saved by getting rid of all of the sort of chemistry set shit. And look, I mean, I I'm aware of a lot of growers who grow amazing stuff, with salt-based chemical nutrients, hydroponically, whatever. Like everybody has their thing. I just feel, I mean, one of the things that frustrates me about the cannabis industry generally is the waste.
Oh
packaging,
yeah.
bullshit, plastic, I mean,
Especially for, they call it weed for a reason.
yeah,
This plant wants to grow and flourish. And I think what you're talking about brings to mind when I say people who are passionate about soil are passionate about it is because that is really, you if you're growing indoors, you can control the climate. But if you're
yeah,
growing outdoors, you can't, but you can build that soil. And when we look at wine as an example, there's the word terroir,
yeah,
which is used to describe, in essence, the whole environment of how
yeah.
the grapes were grown as the demarcation of quality. So this isn't just hippy dippy like snobby wine. French wine guys have been talking about the terroir for hundreds of years, and what the
And I'm
word
looking at,
terroir
yeah,
really means is earth, dirt. It is the soil.
yeah, yeah. I'm completely bought into this, and more generally, just into the idea that in every way that we can, because our leaders are not going to do it for us, we have to do our part to try and remediate a bit of the damage. I mean, I really really struggle with where we are, environmentally these days, and I don't I don't say this to put myself on any kind of pedestal or polish my own credentials in any way. I just feel really strongly that we need to be moving toward this more organic, back to the earth, working with nature kind of an approach. And I guess to the extent that I participate in the social media thing with my kind of grow diary, Instagram feed, part of what I hope, I don't want to preach, and I hope I never sound preachy about it, but part of what I hope is that the people who follow me or engage with the content that I post will see from the results that I'm sharing that it is possible to do this in a cleaner, lower impact kind of a way. And I'm happy to say that I feel like I'm pretty sure I've convinced a few people, because I get them asking me all the questions and I don't really feel qualified to provide too many of the answers. But I can point them back to my guide, Dr. Organic's Living Soil, the person I just referred to. And this guy is still, basically happy to engage anyone that wants to talk and listen. And part of his mission is to debunk the marketing machine that's so busy at work flogging all of this unnecessary shit to us. So
Yeah, and that's awesome. It's great to do that, and there's so many aspects to cannabis culture, and online cannabis culture is a huge part of that. And part of that is because it was interesting. I really started doing this kind of work. Not when the internet was like 12 nerds. I consider myself a nerd. I don't mean it as a derogatory. I just
I
mean
agree.
not when it was like research scientists, but pretty early on, and you saw weed people flood to the internet because we were pushed out of every other conversation. That's part of it was the margins, and so as a marginalized group of people, we formed a really solid and so many advances in the culture, whether in hash making, in cultivation, in genetics, in discussion of public policy,
Yeah,
and activism against the drug war. All and a lot of people had no other source. Jack Herrer rhymes with terror's book and
yeah,
High Times back when it was cool, and there wasn't a lot else out there. And then there was this explosion. And then to speak to the environmental stuff, um, there's a really amazing, largely untold story in how you have these already back to the land people up in Humboldt,
yeah,
and you have pushed them out to these remote regions to grow and just to get cheap land, and then they're going to grow weed to make ends meet because they love weed. And then you add the drug war, and they're having to make what were really called guerrilla gardens, not like the animal in gorilla, but
Yeah,
in
yeah,
terms of guerrilla techniques. And what that did was these people became experts in off the grid growing, and that meant using the least inputs you could, because you had to I'm gonna use a Yiddish word, you had to schlep it all out
yeah,
into the woods. And because they were already attuned to natural ways of life, not everybody in Humboldt County, but lots of advances in the living soil world were made by people who had the time, the energy, the mindset, and the incentive to experiment in
and the
different
necessity,
ways.
you know.
Um, and a lot of who were buying early solar water pumps, et cetera, et cetera. Like, so this new way, and at heart, our environmental problems, a lot of them come down to agriculture and food production. And so this community, this cannabis community, we have contributed uncredited all too often a lot of ideas, permaculture ideas, not that every idea even came from the weed community, but they were the early adopters, and
Yeah,
the people who served as sort of the tests. They tried out a lot of things and started to
yeah,
hone in on what works. So we can all be proud of that. In the UK, I'm wondering, do you have a sense of like where the legalization movement is at?
yeah. Again, another great question. I think that uh, in the near term, I don't see it happening. Although, well, I should qualify that. I don't see recreational legalization on the horizon in the foreseeable future, simply because we've had successive governments of psychopaths who are really only concerned with ensuring that they and the billionaire types that own them continue to accumulate as much wealth as they can.
Wow, that's
And
an unimaginable state of affairs. Oh,
yeah,
wait.
no, well, this is the thing. This is the thing. I'm actually, my wife and I are laying the groundwork to move back to the States because there's no longer any advantage to living here. It's exactly the same, with minus the religious fundamentalism. That's the only thing in political terms that is worse. There are, I mean, it's anyway, that's a side subject. But coming back to the legalization question for the UK. So, what you're probably aware that in recent years they have begun to legalize medical use, and it started with, the kind of some, I think, maybe locally famous cases. I don't know that they're internationally famous, but that's sort of, my child has severe epilepsy. I gave him or her, a cannabis oil, and it completely eradicated the symptoms. You must stop persecuting us for trying to take care of our own children, that sort of thing. There were a few high profile cases like that which paved the way for the first kind of medical legalization. At this point, you can now get a prescription from your doctor. Um, I haven't looked into it myself because the medical cannabis that I've seen in this country is fucking horrific. Like, it's just awful. Like, whatever it may have once been as a plant has been completely desiccated out of what you end up seeing in these jars, which they sell at a very high price, you know, and also are, I think, the selection that's available generally. I hear different things. I don't pay that much attention, to be fair, so I may be talking out my ass here a little bit, but what I have seen personally, I would never smoke that. Like, not even if that was the only thing available, I would not smoke that. It just looks awful. and it barely resembles the flower that it once was. So there's a long way to go, I think. I think that, what bodes well is that more and more people are getting these prescriptions and using them and being out and proud about it. There's also an organization called CanCard, I think it is. And this is basically an outfit that will issue you, if you qualify, and I think the bar is fairly low, but if you qualify, they'll issue you with a card that you can present to the police so that if they pull you aside on the street or in your car or whatever and find that you're carrying your medicine, it's not, there's no guarantee, but there's a high probability that if you have one of these cards and the police find you with it and you're not holding 10 dime bags of weed, you've got one bag of weed. they'll,
That, well,
they'll
let me make your point there. That's a solid tip for anybody who might be doing anything. Um, yeah, think about that because that can, if you are living in a prohibition place, that can really affect how you are treated in a court of law.
yeah,
Yep. So, sorry. So that's
no, that,
that's really interesting. I'll make the point that there's sort of two gauges of this. There's the public opinion gauge, and then there's the political reality gauge.
exactly.
And it really has to meet both standards.
Yeah,
The politicians are never going to be ahead of the people. So
never.
if the people aren't there, forget about it. But you can have a situation where the people are ready to enact this change, but the politics, it's just not going to happen under that paradigm. But that can change really quickly
Yeah,
when the political situation hopefully does change.
well,
Let me ask you. Oh, sorry. Go.
I could, I'll try to be brief about this. So we're in a position where the current conservative government is on fairly shaky territory. I don't know when a general election will be called. I don't think they have to call one until sometime either late 24 or early 25. But these things often happen faster when the sitting government becomes too unstable, and it looks like we could be getting to that point. Too soon to say. The trouble we have is that the Labor Party, again, mirroring what we see in the States with the Democratic, especially the national Democratic machine. We've seen both of these allegedly leftist progressive parties move more and more to the center for decades now. That's the strategy, is to try and occupy the center. And when you have politicians who claim to be progressive trying also to occupy the center all the time, they'll generally unwilling to take the risk, the political risk they perceive in alienating those centrist voters and especially older voters, right? The same, all the same dynamics exist in the States. I'm not telling you you don't know anything that you don't know from your own experience in the US, but that's the situation here. So we don't have a very courageous kind of left in the UK. We don't really have a left, I don't think. I mean, not one that has any political clout. So that's why I struggle to kind of see how recreational legalization could be on the near horizon. However, you know, eh, I'm not much of a joiner, so I haven't really participated in these things. But every 420, there's a massive, pretty much open party in Hyde Park in central London. Um, I may check it out one of these years. I don't know. There's also another annual event called Product Earth, which takes place kind of in the Midlands every August. So that's coming up. I think it's maybe even this weekend. I don't know. But that is another event which has a kind of a generic sounding name, but which is dedicated 100% to cannabis, right?
These are some of the early indicators that legalization is going to happen.
Well, I think you can
People
say that.
smoking in this
Yeah.
people smoking in the street with some bravado. Good sign. Maybe not the smartest thing to do, but it's a good sign that legalization is perhaps and hopefully closer than you think. uh, big events like that, which
Yeah.
also, if you've listened to every episode of this show, you know I'm not a cheerleader of capitalism or the industry, but that is an element of legalization. It plays a role. Certainly, the idea that people are going to create this new industry. Um, and then a big 420 celebration definitely helps. I want to ask you. I've been wanting to do a show. We and shout out to any one of our supporters and in the UK. I've been wanting to do a show in the UK because we have. I think it's the third, biggest audience for the podcast is there, and I've never had the good fortune to be there other than changing planes in the airport, which I don't think is the best representation of a country. So I'm going to say I've pretty much never been there. But um, so in the same way, in the United States, if you said to somebody who's a famous stoner,
Yeah.
you'd probably hear Willie Nelson or Snoop Dogg.
Yep.
You know, just being reductive. So I'm wondering who in the UK. I'm not as it's not as important to me that they're like the most famous person who kind of likes weed. I'd be more interested to talk to somebody who's well known in the UK, and really holds that flag up for the culture.
Um, that's a very good question, and I'm not sure I have a great answer for it, but I do have one answer. And I'm just trying to see if I have this book within my reach. So never mind for now. There's a guy called Professor David Nutt, Nutt. Yeah, have you heard of him?
Yes, yes, but please go on.
Well, so in a nutshell, David
Whoa,
Nutt.
whoa, 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 you're not getting that pun through
That
that easy.
one snuck past me.
That could be a good episode title as well. Anyway.
Yeah, so in a nutshell, David Nutt was in, I believe, the Blair the final Tony Blair administration. So right around the time I showed up here, I moved here from New York in 2005. Um, and David Nutt was the drug czar, whatever his official title was, I don't remember, but um, he was booted by Gordon Brown, who was Tony Blair's kind of number two, um, who had a brief premiership following Tony Blair's departure. And David Nutt was booted because he was saying politically unpopular things about legalizing certain substances and also about alcohol, which he is not a fan of. And yeah, he was just too outspoken to hold a cabinet position, and he was given the sack. And he's gone on
He
to
was
do.
given the nutsack. Are you going like
No,
slow, subtle?
no, that one, no, that was, yeah. So so he's attached, I believe, to either Imperial College or the University College of London, a prestigious research institution right in the heart of London. He's involved in a lot of psychedelics related research these days. He features in various documentaries you may have come across on Netflix. And he is yeah, he's a pretty outspoken and high profile person advocating for not just legalizing cannabis and well, the cannabis was, I believe it was a class C drug until the late 2000s or early 20 teens, for lack of a better term. uh and yeah, they notched it up one degree of severity. So class A drugs are the white drugs like cocaine and heroin, all that sort of stuff.
And they had a bit of a like skunk scare, right? Like they created this.
Honestly, man, I mean, again, I'm not going to tell you anything that you don't know probably way better than I do, but it was pure media hype bullshit. Like it was just
even
a bunch.
even by US standards, it
Yeah.
was
Well,
just yeah.
it's just, it's the classic misrepresentation of cannabis or talking about skunk as some sort of super powerful you know, psychosis inducing products, which, I have come to believe, as the science has advanced, that if it's true that the human brain doesn't really finish evolving or maturing until about age 25, that perhaps there are some risks, or some caution should be applied, by younger consumers. And I think about myself, I started at 14 years old, and I had some pretty scary moments back in the day. I grew up in Portland, Oregon. I don't know what I was smoking exactly, but it was powerful, and it was way more psychedelic than a lot of contemporary stuff, although it was also, my body wasn't used to it. So I was much higher then than I tend to be now, you know. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think a lot a lot of progress has been made, and as you say, like, it's all been driven by the people. The politicians, I feel like, may they will catch up. I think, certainly what we've all witnessed happening in the States for the past 15 years or so has been instructive, and you have countries around Europe, considering legalization. I mean, the Germans are making a mess of it already, and the problem that I see there is that, because Germany is one of the largest countries, most influential countries in the European Union, what everybody's waiting to see is what the Germans do, because probably the other EU countries that would consider it will, they'll all have to conform to some sort of, kind of EU umbrella law, right? And the Germans, I think, are ending up defining that law in a way that's not very user friendly. Again, another tangent, but the point being that, you know, although the UK has pulled out, and the UK loves to represent itself as this sort of slightly separate entity that does its own thing and is in charge of itself. Um, you could argue either way. On the one hand, they might look to other countries for kind of a framework that they might be able to apply here, or they might reject it reflexively because they don't want to be seen to be kind of duplicating anything that the EU is doing, because that's how petty it really has become.
Oh, wow.
You know? So
Well,
it's hard to say, but I think money, as you pointed out a while ago, money will eventually motivate the change, I think. And I hate that, because that's not why it should change.
it's the classic double-edged sword in
Uh,
that I could just say it was an undeniable part of what changed the political reality. It's not what changed people's minds. That there wasn't enough people who were like, "Oh, I'm going to become a billionaire growing weed," so I wasn't for legalization, but now I am. That's a tiny but very dangerous group of people.
yeah, you don't need that many of them when they have as much money and political
Yeah,
clout as they
yeah.
have.
But that's what it did. It created a kind of political will, but that came to bite us in the ass. And everybody. But I think lessons have been learned from that, and um, people are much much more conscious of putting the social justice aspects of legalization first and talking less about the tax money and the jobs uh, and those aspects of it. And
I
just to sorry, go on.
I want to ask you a question. I don't want to cut
Yeah.
off your follow up, but I would like to know what you think of the current state of affairs in California specifically, and whether you see any of these kind of money and power driven problems improving. And I'll tell you why I'm asking. I'm asking because I have a very tolerant wife, in insofar as she tolerates having a 1 by 1 by 2 meter tent in our kitchen, like a giant fucking TARDIS, right? And she has tolerated an entire back garden full of 6 foot tall weed plants last year. Is she comfortable with it? Not
Mhm.
entirely. but does she tolerates it because she realizes how much pleasure and goodness it brings to my life. And part of what she has gone on to say is, I would be so happy for you to work in this legal industry in the States if you wanted to do that. And we want to move to LA or the LA area. And I have a friend that has a dispensary in LA, and I know something of the reality of him trying to run that whole operation. It's a self-supplied dispensary, so there's layers of complexity and bullshit they have to deal with. And the bottom line is, my sense of the marketplace in California is that it's actually very difficult to make any money in the business because of the way it's been structured. And I know there's been a lot of pushback to that. And I'm just wondering, for somebody who lives there and knows this inside and out, where do you see it going?
Good question. Tough question. I'm gonna start with a disclaimer, which is that I think my advantage in answering a question like that is I talk to all different kinds of people who are involved in different aspects of the industry, specifically, including above ground and underground. My disadvantage is that because of uh, I'm not an expert in any one of those aspects, so I have a sort of a sense.
Yeah,
Everything you've heard about the difficulties is real, and that even extends to the big, multi-state operators that, are certainly not, where my heart lies.
yeah,
Anybody who's bringing quality weed to the people in a semi-ethical way, it's fine. But I'm just saying, like, the people that I root for are certainly, the small farmers, the legacy operators,
absolutely.
etc. I think it's like this, most of what could have gone wrong hopefully has gone wrong already.
Yeah,
So, like, in a way, if you're coming into it now, there's a lot less people operating under unrealistic expectations, and it was that sounds the wrong way, because people
I hear you.
thought that, like, the rules would be written in a fair way and applied in a way that made sense, and that uh if you worked hard and did a good job, you would have a reasonable chance of success. That's what I mean, unfortunately.
Yeah,
um and so that has a lot of that has shooken out. And then other people, that we're going to make 100 times our investment in 3 years, people have also been disabused of that notion.
yeah,
So what I would say is, if you see an opportunity, if you see a place now that is doing reasonably well now, they are forged in the fire of adversity.
yeah,
So, that said, the big top heavy places, I think, have a good chance of going down.
yeah,
Um, the stock prices of these big multi-state ones that are listed somewhere are down 95% from where
yeah.
they were 2 years ago. I'm no expert, but that seems bad.
There's a certain
And they
thing.
grow not great weed and try to sell it for way too much,
Yeah,
losing
I
money
have.
while they do
I'm not at all troubled by
No,
by.
I think, but quite the opposite. I think that's going to create opportunities for the smaller quality based places that are left, that wouldn't be there had these big top heavy corporate entities been successful and gobbled up market share and expanded to become, ubiquitous chains. So I think that's, you know one aspect of it, but it's certainly tough. Moving to another country is a difficult. I'm assuming you might be a citizen here, so that would be
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
easier.
I grew up there.
Yeah.
I've lived here for close to 20 years, and it feels like it's time for a change. So, yeah,
Yeah.
it will still be a culture shock for sure. But like, we went on a vacation this time last year that started in LA, and got a sense of the lay of the land, and checked out our friend's dispensary, which is one of these sort of gray market ones that's off the grid.
Yeah.
So
Well, I
anyway,
can't I can't advise you on or off, and especially on camera.
no, no,
In that situation, I am gonna it's 4:20 right here where I am as we record this. I'm gonna I have to say this was a fantastic sesh. I
yeah,
have
that's it.
greatly enjoyed getting to know you. I'm very appreciative of your kind words about the show and for supporting us, and how about we sesh on the way out.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right, and for everybody who joined us in this sesh, if you are watching this and you want a secret sesh with me, please send me an email, info@greatmomentsinweedhistory.com. Otherwise, we'll see ya on Weedness Day for an all new episode. Thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed this one.
Many thanks, Bean. Loved it. Take it easy.
Same.
Ciao.
Uh,